Welcome to Buddha Balance, a space where silence is sacred and every breath is a way home. Have you ever looked into a mirror and no longer recognized the person staring back? Not because you've changed, but because, for so long, you've been playing a role that isn't truly you. A good child, a perfect employee, someone who's always strong, even when quietly breaking inside. In today's video, we'll take a very special journey. A journey where the Buddha meets Carl Jung. Not to argue, but to gently extend their hands and guide us back to who we really are. Where light and shadow are no longer in conflict, but together create wholeness. Take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. If you're ready, let us begin. One day, you sit in front of the mirror, looking at yourself, and you no longer recognize the person staring back. Not because you've changed, but because over the years, you've carried too many things that were never really yours. Roles, expectations, broken promises, wounds that never had a name. They piled up, layer after layer, like dust in an old attic. And you called it life. Then, you began to feel tired. Not tired from the weight itself, but tired because you no longer know what truly belongs to you. I'm not writing these words as someone who's figured it all out, but as someone who's sitting with you in the quiet of the night, when the city has fallen asleep and the voice inside finally starts to speak. I have suffered. I have lost. I have clung on. I have suffocated in the version of myself I tried to build, just to be acceptable in someone else's eyes. Until I learned to let go. Why do we suffer? If there's one question that opens every journey of healing, it is this: why do we suffer? We don't suffer because something happened. We suffer because we didn't want it to happen. Losing a job, a breakup, betrayal, illness, failure. They're all just part of life's natural changes. But we suffer because we cling to a thought in our minds. It shouldn't be this way. I don't deserve this. That person had no right to do this to me. Suffering comes from resisting reality. The Buddha called it tanha, the craving that gives rise to suffering. Jung called it the split between the ego and the shadow. Different words, same truth. We hurt because we fight against what is. Someone once told me, I can't forgive my mother. She left me when I was 6. She never called. She never loved me. I looked at him, and I didn't talk about his mother. I simply asked, how long have you carried that story in your heart? 30 years, he said quietly. 30 years of holding on to that anger. And it wasn't his mother who was suffering. It was him. Because he hadn't lived with his mother, but with the memory of her. And though that memory never changed, it burned him, day after day. Clinging, a gentle shackle that tightens with time. We don't often realize we're clinging. Because clinging doesn't scream, it whispers. Softly. Gently. Like when you keep waiting for a message that never comes. Or when you hold on to a shirt you no longer wear. Simply because it was a gift from them. Or when you tell yourself, if I were thinner, maybe he would come back. Clinging doesn't live in our actions, it hides in the heart. And the heart is so subtle that even we don't know we've been tied. A woman once came to me after a talk about letting go. She cried. For a long time. Then said, I can't leave this job. I hate it. But if I quit, my parents will be disappointed. I didn't tell her to quit. I simply asked, who's living this life, you or your parents? There's no right answer. But here's the truth. When you live someone else's life, you lose your soul bit by bit. Letting go is not giving up. When we say let go, many people think it means running away, surrendering, quitting. It doesn't. Letting go is the most courageous act of a mind awake enough to see, I don't need this anymore. Letting go doesn't mean you escape something, nor does it mean you cling to something. It simply means you stay right here in this moment and breathe it out gently. Someone once told me, I'm afraid that if I give up my dream of becoming a doctor, my parents will see me as a failure. But is that really true? You don't let go because the dream isn't beautiful. You let go because it's no longer yours. Like a pair of shoes that once fit perfectly, but now leaves your feet bleeding. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are. If they hurt you, they're no longer meant for you. Breath and impermanence, the first light step. One of the first lessons I learned from meditation was how to breathe. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But the truth is, most of us go through life not even realizing we are breathing. We breathe out of instinct, not presence. And because of that, we pass through each moment like a nameless shadow. I once met a mother who had lost her daughter in an accident. She sat before me, eyes weary, hands clinging tightly to a handkerchief with her daughter's name embroidered on it. She said, I don't want to live anymore. I don't know who I am without my child. There was nothing I could say to take her pain away. But I invited her to breathe. Just breathe. Not to forget, but to be here. Day by day, breath by breath. She learned to listen to her own heart. Not to run from the pain, but to sit beside it. She started journaling, planting trees. And one day, she wrote, I never really lost my daughter. She just went somewhere I haven't reached yet. Mindfulness doesn't erase sadness, but it helps you fully be with it. Without judgment, without resistance. And from there, acceptance quietly begins to sprout, like the first bud of spring. The shadow, the soul's inverted mirror. If the Buddha teaches us to look directly into our suffering to understand and release it, then Jung walks us down a different path. The path of the shadow. Not to avoid pain, but to meet ourselves within it. In the darkness, where we've hidden all the parts we don't want to see. Jung called it the shadow. It's not a monster, but all the pieces of our ego we've once denied. Jealousy, fear of abandonment, desire to be seen, childhood wounds. Everything society deemed unacceptable, we buried. But like all forgotten children, the shadow never dies. It just waits until the day it returns. I once worked with a man who had everything. A thriving career, a perfect family. But he often erupted in anger, especially when someone criticized him. In therapy, through dreams and unconscious imagery, he remembered being a young boy beaten by his father for being too weak. He buried that fear deep down and built a powerful persona to survive. But the pain never vanished. It simply disguised itself as rage. We cannot let go of what we do not know we're holding. Jung taught, bring light to the darkest corners of the soul. Only when you accept the shadow can you become whole. A dream, a mirror to the self. A woman once shared with me a dream. In it, she was lost in an old house filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of herself. One was crying. Another was a little girl holding a teddy bear with worried eyes. Another showed her in a business suit, stiff and cold. She looked into each mirror, but felt she resembled none of them. Panic rose, until she came to one mirror that showed nothing at all, just darkness. She reached out her hand, and heard a whisper, "Welcome home." Jung believed dreams are the language of the unconscious. Every image is a part of us. The parts we embrace, and the ones we deny. The mirror in that dream wasn't meant to reflect perfection, but to help her face herself, fully and honestly. That dream became a turning point. She began to write down memories, acknowledge the wounds, and find the courage to say the truth aloud. That she had been abused. That she feared abandonment. That she was tired of always being strong. And the moment she dared to reach into the darkness was also the moment she began to see the light. Not because it came from outside, but because it had never left her. Where Buddha meets Jung, the melting of the ego. Someone once asked me, how can we reconcile Buddhism with Jung? Isn't one about letting go of the self, and the other about finding the true self? I smiled. What's wrong with letting go of the false self to return to the true one? The Buddha never taught us to erase ourselves. He taught, do not mistake yourself for your fears, your desires, your titles. And Jung, too, when he spoke of embracing the shadow, he wasn't saying you are the darkness. He was saying, when you have the courage to walk into it, it will no longer control you. Letting go isn't about dissolving into nothingness. It's about becoming whole. That's the meeting point between Buddha's compassion and Jung's darkness. One embraces you with light. The other invites you home through the shadows. And in time, you realize they are one and the same. I once asked an old Zen master, how do I know I've truly let go of something? He looked at me, then pointed to his chest. When you exhale, and there's no tightness here. And I understood. Letting go doesn't happen in the mind. It's not a decision. It's when you're no longer afraid to look directly at the thing that once made you cry. In Jung's darkness, in Buddha's mindfulness, in the quiet stories we whisper to ourselves each day. If you are brave enough to stay, you will find a way out. And that way out has always been within. Let's meet there, where shadow and light no longer oppose one another, but instead come together to paint the full picture of what it means to be human. Beginning from a space of stillness. Have you ever just stopped in the middle of a busy day, turned off your phone, done nothing at all, and simply sat still and breathed? Not to be special, but to simply come home. In a world where everything seems to be screaming for your attention. Emails, messages, deadlines, social media. Silence becomes an act of rebellion. And yet, it's from that very rebellion that you begin to hear your own voice again. Meditation, in its truest form, isn't a technique. It's a space where you don't have to perform, don't have to try, don't have to prove anything. You just need to be here. Someone once told me, I can't sit still. I'm anxious, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I said, then sit and be anxious. Sit and be afraid. But this time, instead of running from it, Invite it to have tea with you. The art of not becoming anyone. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." We often come to meditation with expectations to become better, stronger, wiser. But meditation is not a gym for the mind. It's a space where you let go of the very need to become. A girl in my meditation class once broke down in tears mid-session. I gently asked why. She whispered through sobs, "For the first time, I allowed myself not to be strong." We grow up in a world that celebrates striving, winning, personal growth. But there's another part of us, soft, fragile, wounded, that longs to be touched. Not with pressure, but with kindness and silence. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning your goals. It means letting go of the illusion that you must always be okay to be worthy of love. Forgiveness, not for others, but for yourself. People often ask, "How can I forgive someone who hurt me?" I answer, start by stopping the hurt you bring to yourself every time you remember it. Forgiveness, in both Buddhism and psychoanalysis, is not an act of nobility. It is an act of survival. If you do not forgive, it's not them who suffer. It's you. Each memory becomes a tiny thorn in the heart, scratching you from the inside, day after day. Jung said, "We do not heal by erasing memories, but by giving them a rightful place in the house of the soul." The Buddha taught, "Hatred never ceases by hatred. Only by love can it be ended." Write a letter. No need to send it. Say everything. The anger, the hurt, the longing, the fear. Then burn it. Watch the ashes rise. And whisper to yourself, "I choose freedom." Creativity, when wounds turn into art. I once met a man, in his 40s, gentle, who painted every night after work. He wasn't an artist. He was an accountant. But his small rented room was filled with color. When I asked, "Why do you paint?" he replied, "So that the things I can't say have a place to breathe." It was one of the most beautiful definitions of creativity I've ever heard. In psychoanalysis, creativity is a way to transform psychic energy, from conflict to expression, from pain to form. In Buddhism, creative acts, when done mindfully, are a path of meditation. You don't need to draw well, write beautifully, or take perfect photos. What matters is that in that moment, you are present. A woman who had suddenly lost her husband took up pottery. She said, "When I touch the clay, it feels like I'm touching the shattered pieces inside me. And when I mold a vase, I realize I can still create something beautiful out of what has broken." Healing doesn't always look like sitting still with your eyes closed. Sometimes it's plucking a note, spreading a color, writing a line of poetry that doesn't rhyme. Rebirth, not in another realm, but in this life. People often think rebirth is something mystical that happens after death. But if you've ever gone through a pain that seemed unbearable, and one day you smiled again, that is rebirth. Carl Jung once said, "Real change begins when a person touches the bottom of their pain, not because they are destroyed, but because everything false has burned away." From the ashes, a new self emerges, not more perfect, but more real. Buddhism calls it living in each moment. Every breath, every small choice can be a new beginning. A friend of mine went through divorce, lost his job, and fell into depression for 2 years. He started over by growing vegetables. Each morning, he went out to the garden, bowed down to tend the mustard greens. And he said, "I'm not growing plants. I'm learning how to be human again." Healing has no map. Rebirth has no formula. It's a path we each must walk, on our own 2 feet, with our own tears. But you are never truly alone. In every page you read, every meditation you sit through, every journal entry, every note of music, every brushstroke, every quiet glance at yourself in the mirror, something is coming back to life. A you, more honest, more gentle, more grounded, is returning. That is the gift of letting go. Not losing, but finding what was never truly gone. When you no longer have to pretend. One day, I saw again the woman who once told me about her dream of mirrors. She no longer feared mirrors. And in her eyes, I didn't see radiance, triumph, or a dazzling glow, but something much deeper, peace, like a quiet lake after a storm. She said, "I no longer try to make people understand me. I no longer feel the need to always be okay, just so others can feel at ease. I just live. Live truthfully, live fully." I smiled, because I understood. When someone has touched rock bottom, walked through the darkness, and sat beside fear without running, they no longer need to hold themselves together. Authenticity becomes instinct. Carl Jung called it individuation, the inner union. Not becoming someone new, but returning to the self, where both light and shadow coexist. Buddhism calls it nirvana in everyday life. No need to search for another world, because even this very breath is sacred. To keep living as a form of gratitude. Letting go doesn't make life lighter, but it makes your heart wider, so you can hold even the things that cannot be changed. The past, the people you once loved, the wounds that never fully heal. Someone who lost their father at a young age once told me, "I'll never stop missing him, but I no longer blame life." I cherish those memories. They taught me how to love. When you release what is no longer yours, you don't become lost. You come closer to yourself than ever before. You don't leave anything behind. You simply stop clinging to what has passed. So your hands are free to hold the present. If you're reading these words, you're likely walking through a hard chapter. Maybe loss, maybe crisis, maybe an unnamed emptiness. I don't have the answers, but I offer this promise, that every journey of letting go, if walked with mindfulness and honesty, won't lead you to desolation, but will bring you home to your heart. Let your breath guide you. Let your dreams whisper their truths. Let every sorrow become the soil for new life to bloom. You don't need to become anyone. You only need to be truly present with yourself. And that is enough. And when you are ready, the world, too, will soften, open, and gently say to you, "Welcome home."